Congress just changed one of the most hated parts of federal gun law, and almost nobody is talking about what could happen next. Because if you own an SBR, want an SBR, or live in a state that bans them, this fight may be getting a whole lot bigger. Quick question before we continue. Are you subscribed yet? Because what I'm about to explain could save you from making a very expensive legal mistake. Hit that button now, because gun laws change fast, and the people who wait for the news to catch up are usually the last to know. Here's what just happened. Congress passed a major change to the National Firearms Act, also called the NFA. If that term sounds confusing, let me make it simple. The NFA is the old federal law that puts extra rules, taxes, and registration on certain firearms and items. That includes suppressors, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and a few other things. And one of the biggest parts of that law was the tax stamp. For decades, if you wanted to make or transfer one of those NFA items, you usually had to pay a $200 tax. That may not sound huge today, but when this law started back in 1934, that was a massive amount of money. It was designed to hurt. It was designed to discourage people. It was not just paperwork. It was a penalty dressed up like a tax. Now Congress has changed that. The tax on many of these items, including short-barreled rifles, drops to zero starting January 1st, 2026. Let that sink in. The federal government is still treating SBRs like NFA items in key ways, but the tax piece, the part lawmakers used for decades to justify this whole system, has been seriously weakened, and that is why people are saying this is bigger than just saving $200. Because once Congress turns around and says the tax is now zero, a lot of gun owners start asking the obvious question. If the tax is gone, then what is the real reason for keeping all the other restrictions in place? And if the federal government is easing up, how strong do state bans on SBRs really look now? That is where this gets interesting. Most people think this story is just about cheaper paperwork. That is not the real story. The real story is what this change may do to the legal arguments around SBR bans, especially at the state level. Let me break this down for you. A short-barreled rifle, or SBR, is usually a rifle with a barrel under 16 inches, or an overall length under a certain limit. Under federal law, that category has been treated differently for decades. You cannot just build one the wrong way and hope for the best. If you do it illegally, you can face serious criminal charges. But here's the crazy part. A lot of these rules were built on the idea that the federal government had special taxing power over these items. That was part of the old legal structure. The tax was not just a side note. It was one of the main pillars holding up the whole system. So when Congress says the tax is now zero, that changes the conversation. Does it instantly erase the NFA? No. Does it automatically legalize SBRs in every state? No. Does it mean every state SBR ban is dead tomorrow morning? Also no, but it does create a brand new opening for legal challenges, because now gun owners and their lawyers can say something very simple. If the federal government no longer sees a reason to impose the old tax burden on SBRs, then why are some states still acting like these firearms are so uniquely dangerous that they must be banned outright? That is the pressure point, and if you miss that, you miss the whole story. If you're finding this helpful, imagine what you'll learn in my next video about the 5 words that can keep a simple police encounter from turning into a legal nightmare. Subscribe now so you do not miss it. Now let me explain why state SBR bans are suddenly under more heat than before. First, you have to understand how these bans usually get defended. States do not normally stand up in court and say, we just do not like these guns. They try to say SBRs are unusually dangerous. They try to say these firearms fall outside the normal protection of the Second Amendment, or they argue that history supports treating them differently. That sounds strong on paper. But the facts have gotten a lot messier. An SBR is still, at the end of the day, a rifle. In many cases, it is functionally very similar to a rifle that is totally legal, except for barrel length or overall configuration. That creates a problem for lawmakers, because when two firearms are very similar, but one is banned and the other is legal, courts start asking a simple question. What is the real difference, and is that difference enough to justify the ban? Now add the new tax change on top of that. If Congress is pulling back the old tax burden, states may have a harder time arguing that SBRs belong in some special untouchable category forever. The more the federal government relaxes, the more state bans can start to look outdated, overbroad, or unsupported. And here is the part nobody is talking about enough. This does not just affect people who already own legal NFA items. It could affect future lawsuits filed by people who were blocked from owning an SBR in states with flat bans. Those plaintiffs can now point to the federal change and say, look, even Congress is moving away from the old punishment model. That does not guarantee a win, but it gives challengers fresh ammo in court. Here's a hypothetical example to explain this. Imagine you live in a state that says you cannot own an SBR at all, but right across the border, another state allows it if you follow federal rules. And and now the federal tax is zero. So you look at that and say, wait a second. The federal government no longer wants $200 from me. It still regulates the item, sure, but it no longer treats the tax as necessary. So why is my state still banning the entire category? That is the exact kind of question judges may start hearing more often. Now, I want to be careful here. A federal tax change does not automatically cancel state law. A state can still have its own ban, and if that law is still on the books, you can still get arrested under it. Do not make the mistake of thinking Congress changed federal tax law, so now your state ban means nothing. That is how people end up charged. And that leads to the next big point. What Congress changed is important, but what Congress did not change may matter just as much. The tax may be dropping to zero, but that does not mean the rest of the NFA system vanished. Registration, forms, approvals, and federal process still matter under current law. So if somebody online tells you, bro, SBRs are basically deregulated now, that person is setting you up for failure. This is the part that shocked me when I started seeing the reactions. A lot of people heard tax gone and somehow translated that into rules gone. Those are not the same thing, not even close. That is why this issue is so dangerous right now. There is just enough truth in the headline to make people overconfident, and overconfidence is exactly how gun owners walk into preventable charges. Hey, 73% of people watching these videos are not subscribed. Do not be part of that group. Join the gun owners who get these updates first before bad information spreads all over the internet. Click subscribe right now. Now let's talk about the legal fight that could come next, because this is where things get even more serious. For years, gun cases were often judged using balancing tests. Courts would ask whether a law seemed reasonable or whether the government had a good policy reason, but recent Supreme Court cases pushed courts toward a history-based test. In simple terms, the government now has to show that modern gun restrictions fit with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. That shift matters a lot for SBR cases. Why? Because once you strip away the old tax burden, the government may have a harder time explaining why an SBR should still be treated like some special class of firearm outside normal protection. A shorter barrel alone may not be enough, especially when many modern rifles are commonly owned, commonly used, and differ only in configuration. Now, does that mean every SBR ban is doomed? No, I am not going to oversell this. Some states will argue public safety. Some will point to older cases. Some will say Congress only changed the tax, not the underlying category, and some judges may agree with them. But here is what most people get wrong. The legal danger to a state ban does not start only when a state loses in court. It starts the moment the state has to defend a weaker argument than before, and that is exactly what may be happening now, because before the government could point to the full NFA structure and say, look, these items have long been taxed and regulated at the federal level. Now that argument loses force. The structure is still there, yes, but one of its most symbolic parts just got gutted, and symbolism matters in court more than people realize. When lawmakers themselves reduce the tax to zero, they are sending a signal, whether they mean to or not. They are saying this item should not be burdened in the old way anymore. Lawyers challenging bans will absolutely use that. Now, quick legal note, this is educational information, not legal advice. Always consult an attorney for your specific situation. Let me give you a real-world scenario. Imagine you live in a banned state and already own a rifle pistol setup, brace setup, or some other lawful configuration that's right near the edge of these rules. You hear the federal tax is gone, and you think, great, now I can just convert it into an SBR and move on with my life. Stop right there. If your state still bans SBRs, that move could put you in serious legal trouble. The federal change does not give you a free pass against state law. This is where people confuse federal relief with total relief, and the two are not the same. Now flip the scenario. Imagine a person in a free state who wanted to file an NFA form but kept putting it off because of the tax. For that person, the $0 change may open the door to ownership that felt too expensive or too annoying. Before, that is a huge practical shift. And once more people lawfully own these items in more places, another legal argument gets stronger. Common use. That phrase matters because courts often ask whether an arm is commonly owned for lawful purposes. If more people can afford to enter the market, and more people do, challengers may later argue that SBRs are even more clearly in common lawful use than before, that could create even more pressure on bans. But wait, there's something even more important. This is not only about future lawsuits, it is also about enforcement choices, right? Now, some prosecutors may take a hard line and say state bans still stand, end of story. Others may become more cautious if they know the legal ground is shifting. Some lawmakers may try to rewrite their statutes before courts force the issue. Others may dig in and fight. So if you are asking, what happens next, the honest answer is this: more lawsuits, More confusion, more people misunderstanding partial changes, and more pressure on states that still ban SBRs outright. That is why this moment matters. Not because Congress waved a magic wand and made all your problems disappear, but because Congress may have weakened one of the oldest justifications for treating SBRs like a special untouchable category. And once that happens, every ban built on that old logic starts looking a little more vulnerable. This information could change. Again, the second a new court ruling drops or a state rewrites its law. Subscribe now, because my next video will explain exactly what gun owners in banned states should and should not do while this fight keeps moving. So here is the bottom line. Congress passed a major NFA tax change, and that means the old $200 federal burden on SBRs is going away. That does not erase the NFA overnight, and it does not instantly kill state SBR bans, but it absolutely puts those bans under fresh pressure, because lawmakers just weakened one of the biggest old arguments behind treating SBRs differently. If you care about your rights, your money, and staying out of trouble, do not rely on headlines or random comments online. Subscribe now, stay with this channel, and make sure you understand the law before you act on it. And one final simple disclaimer. This video is for education only. It is not legal advice. Federal law and state law can work very differently, and one wrong move can still bring real criminal charges. Always check your state law and speak with a qualified attorney before making any decision about an SBR or any NFA item.